Welcome to It's a Fandom Thing and our Deadwood discussion. I am joined by Calamity Tanya. I I just love the cosplay. I think it's amazing. It's incredible. I know probably the hat will be coming off at some point, but it's really cool. So great job. Thank you, Tanya, for doing that. I appreciate it. But we are talking about Deadwood tonight. So, if you don't know what Deadwood is, and if you haven't seen it, we're going to be spoiling things. So, if you don't care about spoilers, that's fine. I mean, this show is old. So, if you haven't seen it by now, I'm not, don't feel bad about spoiling a show that ended in 2006. So, but Deadwood is an American Western television series that aired on HBO, and you can still watch it on HBO, of course, from March 21st, 2004 to August 27th, 2006, spanning 3 seasons and 36 episodes. The series is set in the 1870s, in Deadwood, South Dakota, before and after the area's annexation by the Dakota Territory, and charts Deadwood's growth from camp to town. The show was created, produced, and is largely written by David Milch. Deadwood features a large ensemble cast headed by Timothy Oliphant and Ian McShane, playing the real-life Deadwood residents Seth Bullock and Al Swearingen, respectively. Many other historical figures appear as characters, including George Crook, Wyatt Earp, E.B. Farnham, George Hurst, Wild Bill Hillcock, Calamity Jane, also known as Calamity Tanya, Soulstar, A.W. Merrick, Jack McCall, and Charlie Utter. The plot lines involving these characters include historical truths as well as substantial fictional elements. Milch did use actual diaries and newspapers from 1870s Deadwood residents as reference points for characters, events, and the look and feel of the show. There was some controversy with the show with the language because there is tons of cursing. Tanya and I were just talking about that beforehand. If you haven't seen this show and you go and watch it, if you can't handle cursing, it'll probably throw you. I'm fine with it, but I forgot how much was in here. And just as a little bit of trivia here for that use of profanity, and the reason they were criticized is because some people thought it wasn't historically accurate to use so many obscenities, because the word fuck is said 43 times in the first hour of the show.
That's awesome.
And it has been reported that the series had a total count of 2,980 fucks and an average of 1.56 utterances of fuck per minute of footage.
Thank you for that. I hadn't looked that up, and so I appreciate that very fucking much. Thank you. So if you don't like language, it's time to fuck off. Or if you haven't, so yeah, we're
time to fuck off.
It's right. I mean, you can't. It's just I was making sure. Normally I can restrain myself and not swear, and the hat had to fucking go because it doesn't fit with the fucking headphones. So I'm trying to rival them for their count. But rewatching this with my daughter, who's 18, so it's not like I'm watching this with a child. We are counting. We have a CS count, and you can probably guess what a CS is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So we can get into that. But I was making sure with you before we jumped on, like, hey, I'm gonna have to swear. Like, this is not gonna fucking happen. So yeah. And then I was like, I'm gonna do this costume, damn it, for the 6 people that will understand it. And to be true to the period, I have not bathed or shaved in a couple of weeks. So I just
I always think that whenever I'm watching Westerns, you watch them and you're like, oh my gosh, can you imagine the smell?
Mm-hmm.
Because people maybe bathe like once a year. I mean, it's like really gross. And you think they've had like sex, they've every kind of bodily function, and they haven't bathed. It's so gross to me.
Yeah, I think so. I think they actually, I feel like we're going to start with the filth, which is appropriate. Because like one thing that's hard about this costume is even like trying to like make myself look dirty. I'm going to have to distress the clothes a little bit when I get a minute. But I think the costumes for this were so good. So, so good, and the makeup. And I remember when and I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead, but
No, it's fine.
when I watched this show, so we're just gonna go for it. This is my favorite show, and I've probably been bothering you to do this for at least a couple of years, and I've rewatched it a couple of times during the pandemic. And it's such a funny show for me to say it's my favorite because it's not normally a show I would have been particularly grabbed by. Like, I like the West and things like that, but it's, I like aliens and superheroes and fantasy elements. But this show is just so well written and so smart. At any rate, I watched this show first by renting the DVDs from a Blockbuster Video, and that is a very old-fashioned sentence, to borrow John Mulaney's um, phrase. So right in about 2007. So it was not long after it had aired, but I definitely didn't have HBO, and my kids were very little at that point. So watching this was probably just like nothing short of shocking in terms of the content and everything. But I remember in one of those DVDs, they had the commentaries like they would do. And they were saying that the actors were saying when they came to set, they had a filth spray gun that they would like an airbrush makeup thing, but
Yeah.
they would just like basically hit them with this blast of dirt and dust and like all their clothes, and they had to get them to look appropriately nasty.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's awesome. Yeah, because I mean, I will say, and we're kind of jumping ahead. We are going to go back to doing the introducing and what we're into right now. We will go, but
Nope.
we kind of just did that. But I will say that watching this and watching back, you can almost smell this show. There's very few shows that are like that, but you can almost smell it. I mean, when I was watching the series finale this morning, and and I mean, this happens in a couple of other episodes, of course, too, but watching just the mud and the dirt and they're walking around in it. And I'm like, it's just, you can smell it, just that earthy smell mixed with sweat, mixed with blood, mixed with everything. So it is a show that's very tactile in that way, I think. And I do agree about the costuming. Yes, 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 I do. And we are going to have trigger warnings in a second here, too. But before we get really deep into Deadwood, which we will. So is there anything else you're into right now, Calamity Tanya?
No. Yeah,
No.
yes. Let me think. So
No.
I'm messing. I have been hardcore into this. What am I watching? House of the Dragon, which is we're just gonna make that face about it. I'm like, I wanna like it. I do, but it's so weird. I don't know, it's weird. And I say that as a big Game of Thrones fan, except for the last part, which we don't talk about. Yeah, it's okay, but I have to say I did watch the other fantasy product, the Lord of the Rings prequel, The Rings of Power, and that is fan fucking tastic so far. Like, just I don't know how much money they spent on that show, but it has to be the highest production I've ever seen, like, on any TV show, maybe anything. Like, the visuals are just it's worth watching it just for that. It's so good, like, in that way. But
Yeah, and someday, going back to the Game of Thrones thing, someday we will have to cover that show. I've never watched Game of Thrones. I've heard all about Game of Thrones, but I've
yeah.
never watched Game of Thrones. So I know someday we'll have to cover it. It's something that I'm putting off and putting off and putting off because I'll be frank, I'm not like biting at the bit to watch it kind of thing.
It's good. I have to say, like, I say that as like, I read the books, like, I'm an OG nerd on that show and love the books so much that Arya was on the short list for one of the names of our kids, like, before the show, before all that. And I had seen Deadwood, as I mentioned, and then they announced that HBO was doing Game of Thrones, and I was like, amazing, because they're gonna after watching Deadwood, I had confidence, like, okay, they're not gonna make this PG-13, which is what was my fear for Game of. In fact, they almost went the other way too far when they didn't have to on some of it, which is a topic for your other podcast on that. But yeah, they really did a fantastic job, and this show Deadwood actually, I think, set the precedent. And this came after Sopranos, so I'm sure
Mhm.
Sopranos, which I've not seen because I'm not a big like mafia movie person, but I recognize that that is the shift in terms of the television kind of zeitgeist and like the direction things went after that point. So,
Yeah, you had that, and you had 6 Feet Under, of course, which we covered last week, and you had on Showtime, like, Queer as Folk and
mhm.
stuff like that, and then eventually Dexter and things really pushing them out, like cable, and then FX, which Justified, which we will be doing an episode of Justified. I'm ju test not Testified, Justified. So, with Timo as well. And
With the real fast costume change to make it fast, so fast that it'll make a drag queen envious. Like, whoa, how fast did you?
well, what I'm into is decidedly different. But a lot of fun. I'm not going to tell you much about it because you shouldn't know much about it if you haven't seen it. But went and saw the fantastic new horror film Barbarian.
Oh, yeah.
Go see it in the theater. Don't know a lot about it. Don't seek out a lot about it before you see it. This is one that really, if you feel comfortable going to the theater, is essential to see in a theater with a crowd because this is a journey. If you even the trailer, the little trailer that was out originally does not, you will have no idea what this movie is about by watching the trailer. This movie goes on so many twists and turns and will have you going, what the fuck did I just watch? So I loved it though, and it's very funny too. On top of
Hmm.
everything, it's absolutely hysterical. There's a lot of not showing of stuff that other horror movies would show that is not necessary to necessarily show. And last night, Susie and I, because we both just could not get this movie out of our mind, and we wanted to have a spoiler filled discussion where we could actually talk about everything that goes on. We did a special live stream last night talking about Barbarian. So go and check that out. The podcast episode of that will drop at some point, not positive when, but it will drop as well. So go check that one out and go watch that in the theaters. And yeah, if you're a horror fan, it's a must watch. Okay, well, let's get into something. It's not horror, but there's horrific elements in the show. So let's get back to Deadwood. And I'm going to give some trigger warnings. Of course, we already have cursed a lot because, like I said, there is so much cursing in this show. If you are watching this, if you've heard of this show, I really don't think you should be surprised by that. But if you haven't, then now you know. So of course there's a lot of misogyny in this show. There is a lot of racism in this show. There's a lot of homophobia in this show. I would say there's a lot of there's a lot of murder. There's a lot of death. There's a lot of pretty bad language,
Yeah, I
sexual.
mean, sometimes a cocksucker just needs a good throat cutting. I mean, fucking sorry. I mean, that's kind of like where, not to interrupt you, but I had to go with that.
No,
Um,
it
yeah,
fits. It
it's it
fits.
is rough. Like I didn't know if you were going.
No, if there's anything else you want to add with the trigger warnings, feel free to. But otherwise,
Yeah,
we'll just get into what your overall thoughts are on
sexual
which.
violence.
Yes, yes,
Yeah,
for
trigger
sure.
warning for sexual violence and yeah, just about everything that's uncomfortable that you can think about. It's rough. It is a rough show. And that's another thing that would make it a little bit like, really? You're into this show, person who likes like Captain America and Marvel, that stuff, but it's just so well done and it I don't know. It's complex. So, yeah. So that'd be some trigger warnings in the language, of course.
Yeah, yeah, and I love dark and twisted stuff, as everybody knows. Horror is my favorite genre. So that kind of stuff doesn't bother me at all. I mean, I'm not saying like it doesn't bother me at all. I should I should clarify there. I'm not saying like it's like oh,
Aaron eats that shit for breakfast. Just let me tell you, it's just
yes, yes, it does. Yeah, I'm completely numb to it. No, I don't mean it that way. I just mean that I like darker stuff. Like when we were doing our sitcoms earlier this year, I loved that. But watching 8 sitcoms, I was like, oh my gosh, take me back to Ryan Murphy, even though he's
yeah.
so annoying. So I like this show because it is that way, and like I said, it's so tactile.
Mm.
I can't think of many other westerns that are so tactile and so, like, visceral that you really do feel like you could smell everything and feel everything and feel on edge all the time. So I know you already gave a little bit of your overall thoughts, Tanya,
Mhm.
but what are your thoughts on the characters in this?
Yeah, they make this show. I mean, that's for me, like, what is gonna set something apart is having characters that both are very, very layered and complicated, but for whom you feel sometimes in spite of yourself, some kind of empathy, and you can see their growth. Like, I think just about there are some characters that don't grow a lot, but they definitely things happen to them, and that's okay. But there are other characters where you're like, wow, they really their trajectory is different. And then they do this thing on the show too, where you end up rooting for the guy who you fucking hate, like at first, right? You end up kind of rooting for him. And I love that when a show can pull that on me. It's like, okay, all right, Mr. Milch, you got me. Like, fine, you cocksucker. Anyways, you know, I can't. You clever so and such and such. um, have you done Arrested Development yet? Because I got to be on that one
No,
too.
no,
Because
we
my
haven't.
my children call me Tobias, and you will know why. But I'll put this over here because it's gonna look better. There we go. Um, yeah, so that's what I the characters are great, and I don't think it matters a lot that it's like you had said in your intro, there are historical figures and some of the events are historical events, but none of us were there and at that
Yeah.
so even the recorded history is quite, I'm sure, skewed or at least from a particular perspective. And so I actually have no issues with that. I think it's really good that they didn't sanitize it. And it's one of those shows you were saying you could smell it. I think that's a wonderful, just like you can smell how dirty I am.
Yeah.
Um, no, it's the costume, the set design, they did not sanitize this, and I think that that did so much for this show, and sometimes you're watching a period piece that was maybe filmed now or 10
Mhm.
years ago or 20 years ago, and you can kinda see, "Oh, that's like 1990s hairstyle or makeup or what have you through that it's the 1990s interpretation of what the 1800s look like or something like that. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, it
There's
does.
probably like a total technical term for that that I don't know. I don't think you see as much of that. There is a little bit of it, but I don't think you see as much of that. And I mean, praise hallelujah for this show for not doing the stupid anachronistic thing that bugs the ever living fuck out of me, which I'm going to say is a white wedding dress. They have people get married on this, at least in I don't remember the movie off the top of my head if they do it, but they have
Remember.
people get married and they don't wear a white dress. And thank you because they didn't wear white dresses until maybe the early 20th century. And then like sometimes they'll show women, there's nudity. And as far as I can tell, not that I'm like just staring at boobs, but as far as I can, I mean, boobs are awesome and we all want to look at them. There's not fake boobs. I don't remember looking because sometimes you look and you're like, those are fake boobs,
Mhm.
not judging you, but you wouldn't have had those boobs in that time because they didn't have that yet, right? So
Yeah, there's sagging, there's,
right.
like, yeah. Mhm.
They're the nipples are different. There's like one's going that way, one's going
Yeah.
this way. Anyway, like
It's true, though, and that's important.
and I
That's
think
important.
it's good. I'm like, all right, but it's
Mhm.
and then there's characters female nudity where they'll have hair, like armpit hair and hair on their body and it's like, okay, that's what it would have looked like maybe.
Well, yeah, no, I think it's, one of the things that's always kind of bothered me about the Western genre as a whole is the romanticizing that they do of that time period,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to, like, the cowboy and conquering the Great West and all that kind of stuff, and the outlaw, and how, how much we think that's romantic, and that time period was not as gritty as it was, and I'm not saying there aren't westerns that aren't gritty, but there's always seems to be this undertone of, like, there's definitely the good guy, definitely the bad guy, and even if the ones that were saying the good guys weren't actually the good guys, you're gonna have to root for them anyway because yay, America. I mean, that's kind of yay, USA, that's kind of the way they come across sometimes.
Mhm.
And I'm not saying that I dislike westerns because there are quite a few that I actually do like,
Mhm.
but that aspect of it always bothered me. And I don't think you get that really in this show. I
Mm-mm.
think in this show you are not presented with these people where it's like you definitely know, that the good guys are always going to be basically the white men and the white men who are doing awful atrocious things, but we're going to paint it up as they're not doing atrocious things. But you have characters, you have the Sheriff Bullock in the first season and everything, who you see him beat up a Native American man who it's just absolutely vicious.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of that, not just that scene, but there's a lot of viciousness to this that shows how that time period, I believe, from what I've studied and researched, was a lot more closer to this than a
Mhm.
lot of the other stuff we have seen. This to me is a lot more accurate. I'm not saying it's completely, but a lot of it is more accurate to that time period because of the fact that there was a lot of, like, deep-seated hatred and deep-seated racism and deep-seated, like, violence, just violence, 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 and I think we really like to make that more glamorous than it is. It's like, I mean, Jim Beaver's in this show, who, of
Mhm.
course, played Bobby, most famously for some of us from Supernatural. And I mean, it reminds me of the Supernatural episode where they go to the Great West, and Dean is
Mhm.
so disappointed because when he goes in, he's like, "We're gonna go get a prostitute. She's gonna be, so
Yeah.
glamorous like in the movies," and she's not at all. I
Yeah,
mean, yeah.
she looks like what someone woulda looked like if they did that all day. Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it goes a long way in disrupting the mythos of the American West and disrupting, manifest
Mhm.
destiny and all that fucking garbage, and I'm saying that snark very much intended, so I think that was the point in a lot of ways was yes, they leaned into this stuff that's very uncomfortable as a viewer now. It's hard to watch some of this. It is hard to hear them using I will say cocksucker, I will say F word. I will not say some of the other words, of course, that they
No.
use on
Yeah.
this show. And I'm wondering what that was like even behind the scenes for the actors, because I think even now you would probably tone that down or out, which would be appropriate. But I guess what I'm saying is they don't shy away from showing um, that even people you're supposed to root for were hella problematic, did really horrible things. You have to remember, and they touch on this a bit, but our country had just gotten out of the Civil War. People are traumatized as hell and carrying that trauma around. This is a time when people lost their spouses, they lost their kids just because of the lack of, like, proper medical care. A lot of men had died or lost, limbs and things because of the Civil War. Then you have people going out to this frontier trying to kind of rebrand themselves, and, for me, this show is this is the sociologist talking. It's really about society. It's about trying to figure out how is it that we can create enough of a sphere that people can function in and get things done that they wanna get done, but that does not feel like an infringement on what they want to accomplish, and so
Mhm.
it's a very much at its heart a question of structure versus agency, and also which is central to and also, chaos, like, why do we not just descend into a war of all against all? Well, because it's not in the interest of the people that are in power, and then you see that evolve through the show. So, of course, I like it on a deeper reflection, like, oh, it's really not about cowboys being assholes. It's about sorry,
That's
it's
okay.
a it's about, yeah, other much more complicated conversations.
Yeah, and, I mean, the creator did say a lot of the issues were, that although the series does touch on a variety of issues like race and prostitution and misogyny, violence, politics, and immigration. And when you were saying chaos, it reminded me of this. And most of the major storylines are grounded in the issue of bringing order from that chaos. And when war is very traumatic, any war. And especially back then you didn't have, a lot of the luxuries that we have now. And you also didn't have a lot of people thinking, about therapy or about helping you with your mental health. And when you're dealing with PTSD and you don't realize that's what you're dealing with, you also will get a lot of this too. And trying to bring order from that chaos that you're dealing with as well, like the chaos of the mind too.
Mhm.
So you've
Mhm.
got that on top of it all. And, you've got, like you said, tons of illnesses, which they talk about in here. And then you also have drug addiction. You have
Mhm.
major, which
Mhm.
another trigger warning for that, major drug addiction. You've got the laudanum, which is the big thing that people used back then, and alcoholism too.
Mhm.
And alcohol back then was not the alcohol that we know today. It was a lot. I think it was a lot like stronger, or a lot like, I'm not positive, but yeah, wasn't it? I mean, it wasn't like you didn't get like margaritas or mojitos. You had like whiskey, but it
Yeah.
was very different than like the whiskey
Yeah.
now. So
I don't I'm not I think you're right. That is not something I'm that well versed on, but I definitely, it was now it's probably the difference between like a cigarette and a cigarette with a filter. Like
yes,
where
exactly.
not neither one are good in general for you to consume or healthy, but the filter is gonna like help like I'm guessing people got botulism and all kinds of garbage and just sick from drinking. But yeah, the drug addiction is fascinating. There is I think the show is feminist in a lot of ways that is hard to say when in the first episode you've got a pimp basically, beating a prostitute, right? Like as which is really rough. Like it's hard. I can't it's really hard for me to handle violence against women that is like that. But I say I'm going to make that argument that it's feminist in a way because it's showing you like how limited options were for women. And then in some ways, the prostitutes almost had more freedom than women of a certain class background. You see that contrast quite a bit. And then even when women get some power, thinking of Alma Garrett, she has some power. She immediately becomes a target. Immediately, it puts her in danger. She can't really do much outside of these certain confines of what's expected of her. Yeah, so and I think I can actually do your 6 degrees of what's his name later.
Finn.
So even though I don't know him and I don't watch anything with him, I'm pretty sure I can do it. So
Okay.
I'm
Good.
ready for that.
It won't just be me doing, but yeah. No, I agree on the feminist thing. I think there is kind of a myth that something can't be feminist if it shows any kind of violence against women. I think it's the way it's handled and the way it's shown. I think this is showing something that's very true and accurate. But all the women in here, I think what makes this feminist and makes it more like, the misogyny is coming from the characters. It's not coming from the writing. It's not coming from the people creating the show.
Mhm.
It's coming from the characters. And that's the essential difference there,
Mhm.
because you could have it coming from the writers and the directors, which would be more like if you did have like, we're going to make sure everybody's body is pristine, and the way we're going to show it in the camera is going to be very much from that male gaze. And I'm not saying there isn't some male gaze in this, because there definitely is, but there's a difference there. It's like basically what this is showing is, this is how horrible women were treated. And then some women that you might have thought wouldn't have the same amount of power, like prostitutes and people running brothels and stuff like that, working in brothels, had a little bit more control of their body in a way than women that might have been like thought of as the better class or classier, quote unquote, for a lack of a better word, women.
Mhm.
And so you see that, and that's an interesting contrast to see. And so, but the violence against women just shows more the fact, just shows what misogyny really is. And so shining a light on that and showing the truth and the brutality of it and the sickening side of it, I think in some ways makes a show feminist in a way. It makes
Mhm.
just because it's actually being honest and true about it. It's not saying here's a white knight to come and save all the women either. And I think that's also an important side of it.
Mhm.
So that's how I can see that it is that way. I don't, I think that is just such a myth that you have to have a show has to be
Mhm.
like totally nonviolent to be feminist. I don't think
Mhm.
that's accurate at all. I think it's the way you do the violence and the way and the purpose behind it. If
Right.
it's to get off on the violence against women, then that's a totally different thing. But if
Mhm.
it's to actually be real and show it in order to say, hey, this is our reality that is
Mhm.
still around today, because I think that's also a comment on today in some respects, then I think that's serving a different purpose. So,
Yeah, I think that I agree. I mean, it is and that's where Game of Thrones missed for me, that where they made it more violent than it had to be or more gratuitous than it needed to be, and you didn't need to do that to get the point across. There's very few scenes in this show, Deadwood, where I feel like that didn't have to be there. Like, there's everything just about every scene is serving a purpose. And there's also a little bit of, like, at some point in the first season, Bullock just takes his shirt off, and I'm like, "No." That doesn't like, I don't think so. I mean, I don't think that would have happened. So, you know, not that it's horrible to look at or something, but it's like, I just don't think that would have been a thing that felt a little bit gratuitous for other reasons, but yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, the show's not perfect. No, I mean, there's very few shows that are that, and they'll stumble in some of those areas. Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
So we have talked a little bit already about the treatment of women and sex workers a little bit,
Mhm.
but I wanted to dive a little bit more into the sex worker side of it because, that's something that today still, sex workers are excluded a lot from feminism, sadly, and a lot of feminists look down on sex workers today.
Mhm.
We've talked about that before. And so I want to know how do you think the show treated that? How do you think they had respect? I'm not talking about the characters necessarily, but the show in general, how they treated sex work and sex workers in general.
Yeah, I think that I guess this is gonna be more from my layperson perspective, but I felt that they did a pretty good job with it. Like, just about all of the girls are or the prostitutes are characters. Like, there are some that are not okay, you got your main characters, right? Then and
Mhm.
kind of your ensemble team that we follow their stories. And then you've kind of got your next tier where they're recurring and they matter, but they're just less developed because you don't have time to focus on them. But even those, stuff is going on for them, or there's more of a commentary, or they're shown being um, good or bad or otherwise. They're just shown being humans, right? Not tokenized and they're not just victims. There's a scene where this is really tough. Like, disability is another one that is interesting in this show, and becoming
Yeah.
injured. The Reverend, right, has this tumor happening, and at one point the prostitutes are like making fun of him. And the doc says, the doc is like, who's we didn't get into characters yet, is like, you laugh when you when you laugh, you leak piss, like, to kind of shut her up and put her in her place because she's, being horrible. And I'm not the reason I say that is significant is we're not just demonizing these people, but we can show they can be shitty just like everybody else. And we can also show they can be amazing, like Trixie, right? And Joni,
Mhm.
another character who have kind of hearts of gold in their own ways, and are just as smart and just as like interesting and layered and have their own motivations for doing things as the male characters, and are arguably more interesting than Alma, right? I think
I
anyway,
agree. No, I
and
agree.
have more to do and more like nuance. Um,
No
and
offense
Alma,
to Alma, but
no, she's I
I
mean, and
like her too.
she has issues as well, right? Like, so it's I think that's really positive that they show that even people who have to kind of be put in this position to be what we would consider to be quite low status and to kind of be abused, have some sort of way that they can have agency or autonomy or individualism there's a resistance. And so I like that subtext in the whole show, that everybody's in various stages of kind of getting fucked or getting fucked over or fucking somebody over. And the
Mhm.
metaphor there goes for all those main characters, and also this territory. They at one point they don't know which state is going to like absorb them, and which whose claims are going to be made invalid. Like, you've been working this gold claim, you're supposed to have this land that you stole from Native Americans, and that's the whole thing, which is shitty, okay? But then you're like, "Oh, if Montana takes over this state, I have nothing, and
Mhm.
everything that I've," and so I think that showing just how constrained everybody is and how you try to work it within your little niche is still important. And then I think I've read this before and I did not have time to look this up, so forgive me, but I think prostitutes were actually not considered to be, they had more status in the West than I think we would have thought. Like, there
Yeah.
were just no women, like, and, I think that they were considered an important part of communities from things that I've read at various times. So I think that they do show that, like, there's people who they don't, treat them they don't treat them as the same level, but they don't treat them as second class or third class or fourth class as they treat other groups like the Chinese and the other groups that they're around.
Mhm. Yeah, they're not just pretty wallpaper or, like
Mm,
holes for sorry to be so graphic there, but that's I mean, they're not treated exactly like that. I mean, because there is some really icky behavior that does happen, but I think, the issue with the way that media portrays anything having to do with sex work is, there are a lot of harmful tropes. You do have the hooker with the heart of gold, or the person who finds a John that ends up saving them from this life, or they're definitely drug addicts, or they're definitely like they're stupid, or they don't have any agency. And I think what you said, the most important thing was they are given full characters. A lot of them are their characters and they actually have a backstory. They actually have a story. They actually have more to do than just to serve the man. They're not just there to prop the man up. They're not just there for the man. And I'm not talking about just sexually, but they're not just there in service of the male characters. They are there to actually have their storyline too, and that is very rare for women in general in media. It still is rare, sadly, especially in a genre like a Western. In a Western, usually you don't have that. You might have like one or two female characters that maybe get a little bit more to do than just be there to hook up with the cowboy as he's running, or the outlaw as he's running from the law, but
mhm,
that's usually what you get.
mhm,
And so to have female characters that are not just the wives that are getting this treatment, or not just the partners or anything like that, that they are actually the sex workers, to see that I think is pretty remarkable, and to see that they have many dimensions and they're not all good and they're not all bad and they're not all, that they're human beings. That's
mhm,
the big thing. They're actually human beings. Shocker.
mhm,
So I appreciated that with the characters that were the prostitutes, that they did show that. And I mean, they do show graphic sex scenes. They do show sex scenes in here that I think aren't always about the titillation part of it. More of the, because a lot of times, like I said, you can smell the show. A lot of times I'm like, ew, that doesn't.
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. I think that's a great point, how unsexy a lot of the sex is in this show, and it is very much portrayed like scratching an itch, like, for these folks, or getting drunk, or, it is a for lack of a better word, therapy or stress relief, or this is how they treat it. But yeah, I guess when I said heart of gold, I wasn't trying to go into that
Oh no, I
trope.
know. Yeah, I know what
Yeah, I
you're
just
saying
want to
though.
be clear,
I
because
know what
like
you were
I was
saying.
like,
Yeah.
oh wait, that's problem too. But yes, they're very layered, and like, even I think you do see with Trixie, she ends up having a love interest, and that evolves over the course of the show. But she continues to be a sex worker for, I assume, quite a bit of that initial part of that relationship. And then how she draws boundaries around what is her sex work and what is not, like what's her private life and what's her sex work and what's her relationship with her pimp. That's all very, very complicated and messy, like you'd imagine it would be.
Yeah.
But they do take some time to show how she is put in that position through those relationships, and it's kind of shitty. And also, she does the best she can with it a little bit to try to have some choice over stuff that's going on. Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, let's talk about the male characters. I wanna talk about the male characters
Nope.
because they're
They don't
no,
matter.
they
Nope.
don't matter. They don't matter. Never mind. So next.
Yeah. No, that's fair. Fine.
So
Sausage fest time, I guess. All right.
time to get to the sausage.
Uh,
So what are your overall thoughts on the male characters in here? And I mean, I don't know if there's a do you have a favorite in the male characters? I should have asked that for a female too, but
tough, 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 tough. Well, Jane's my favorite character. I mean, that's just, and she's so like not feminine and
I
not,
know.
in such a mess. Like, also, this historic figure, and they are absolutely showing her just be a human disaster. Sorry, I know you talked about men, and we'll go
No,
there.
I asked you
We'll get there, but
no,
like, yeah,
fine. No, it's fine
I'm
because,
teasing because she can still be
she's
of
an
use.
important character.
Yeah, she's still useful and helpful and, like, saves people and ends up being a pretty good nurse, um, and ends up, like, helping other people and etcetera, and is, her like, slowly losing her battle with alcoholism and depression and everything else that's going on for these folks. So, favorite female characters, Jane. The male characters, it's really tough because I think I'm gonna have ooh, boy, that's a tough one. They're all good, I think, in a lot of ways, but it's hard to beat Al as a character. It's just he's so
Yeah.
complicated and complex. And you, like I said, if anybody can pull that switcheroo bullshit on me, where I go from being like, "That is, I hate that person, I don't like them," and then I'd be like, "I get it." Like I don't sanction what you do, but I see how you're not the most evil person in this grid of characters. So Al's a great character because um, you get insight into him, and he's really trying to. He comes off as an extremely self-interested prick, like an asshole. Just wants to make money, just wants to get laid, wants the power, but slowly the curtain is peeled back on this person, where you realize a lot of his motivation is about securing the camp and the society. Like, he's essentially the government, like, without, like, the unofficial person in charge, it's this gangster guy. um
Mhm.
and he's really looking out for people, and you don't see that right away. Not that he'll hesitate to kill someone who's not convenient. But it is very much that kind of, I want to maintain control. He's thinking like 4 chess moves ahead. If I do this, this person will do this, and this will be shitty for all these reasons. And you slowly get to see that. And then you also know has his own trauma and his own issues. Like, he has health issues that happen throughout the series. He was basically, they imply he was made to be a prostitute as a child. He was abused, sexually abused. They show that, um, and that, yeah, and those repercussions kind of come back and again, and that as rough as he is with the women, he's actually trying to protect them in his own not always great way. And then even Jewel, the character that has disability, he's horrible. And you're like, you're really an asshole. But he hired her to protect her and give her something to do so she didn't end up destitute and or having to be a prostitute. Um, anyway, it's just, yeah, so that it's hard to beat that character. So male characters, I love Charlie Utter and the Doc. If I have to pick a favorite, it's probably a tie between the Doc and Charlie and Ellsworth. Ellsworth, Jim Beaver. I actually liked Jim Beaver before Supernatural because of Deadwood, and I think I had seen Justified before I watch Supernatural. So I want to, and I haven't done this, but I want to get a T-shirt that it's like the roll call thing, but it's all his characters, like Ellsworth and Shelby and Bobby Singer because he's Bobby Singer in The Boys too.
Yeah.
And I want to get that made and wear it to like I've had an auto from him, and he's also just a lovely, lovely human, and funny, and you know good for other reasons. But yeah, so I'm the common denominator and stuff I like tends to be Jim Beaver. So yeah.
Well, he's amazing and he's really good and he's kind of got the face and the build for westerns. I mean, he
Mhm.
just does.
He's
It
from
just fits him.
Wyoming. I think he grew up in
Yeah.
Texas.
Mhm.
But yeah, exactly. You're like, okay, this is
It
yeah,
makes
so
sense.
those and yes. But Doc is a wonderful character. And I looked up how many awards this show won. It should have won more. It
I
just
know I was shocked when I looked that up to refresh my memory.
mhm.
I mean, only won like 1 Golden Globe and like I think it was like 13 Emmys or something,
It
which
didn't
seems
I don't know if it even won Emmys for acting. Like it I don't remember if Ian McShane I know, the Robin Wright who played Calamity Jane was nominated. Several people were nominated. I don't know if they won though, and I'm like, "Come on." I don't remember what beat them, but no, this show is another level.
um yeah, no, it didn't win any for the acting. It was a lot more for like costume
Mhm,
design stuff, like more like behind the scenes stuff. And I'm trying to see if because I mean, talking about Al, you've got Ian McShane's performance is what I think a lot of people remember from this show, even if you don't remember anything else, because it is one of those very memorable chew the scenery, and I mean that in a good way. I don't, sometimes that can be a bad thing,
mhm,
but it is a chew the scenery kind of performance and role. And I think even though the writing is great and the directing is great, I think Ian kind of elevates it even more and makes it so that even though sometimes it's very hard to watch this character and awful things that sometimes he can do, but that performance gives so many levels and so much nuance sometimes to this character that you aren't just seeing the bad stuff. You do see that a lot of the bad stuff is a way to cover up all the pain
mhm,
and all the abuse that this person endured when they were young. So I think that's in there. Like we always talk about eye acting. You see the character in the eyes here. There is
mhm,
no moment of acting. Even though there's chewing the scenery, that doesn't mean that that's acting. It just means that this character is a character that would chew the scenery. This is a louder, bigger than life kind of character, very loud and not just in vocal, but just loud there. You sense his presence in
mhm,
everything, even if he's not in the scene. I mean, I know the series was canceled and I know people were very upset it wasn't renewed. But you do have the final shot in the series. I'm not talking about the movie, but in the series, and it is just him cleaning up blood, and even that is powerful in a lot of respects too. So
mhm,
it's very hard to ignore that character. It'd be very hard to be like, "Ah, whatever. He's just an ass and there's nothing else to him."
mhm.
And I think a lot of that is the performance. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
writing, but a lot of that is the performance. It's
Yeah,
a really, really great performance.
agreed. I mean, the fact that he didn't win an Emmy, is just it's a crime. Like it just it would not have been it would not be my favorite show without that, and the way that I like that description of the acting, and he's never not in character, you don't see
No.
it. There's never like "I'm seeing the guy." Nope, I'm seeing the character, because I've seen him in other stuff, and you're like, "Oh, okay. Yeah,
Mhm.
you really" and you're right, that presence is very larger than life. It's a very if he's in the room, that guy, if he's in the room, he's in the room, and you know it, and he's in charge, and the power and him kind of embodying that in everything. Oh gosh, I had another point there and it flew out of my brain. It'll come back. But like the whole bit about standing out on the balcony and drinking his coffee and yelling at people like,
Yes.
oh, the cleaning up the blood metaphor for this person who's willing to do the uncomfortable, unseemly things for what he perceives to be the best interest of other communities or groups. Like that's a continued theme for Al throughout and you really start to see this when you have Tolliver, who's just a complete asshole and played very well by Powers Booth, but you hate that guy. You're like,
Mhm.
that guy's slimy. I hate him. He's awful. And you see his interactions with Joni as kind of a mirror for Al and Trixie and realize like, okay, this is indeed different. This is indeed a different person with different set of motivations. But even Tolliver is working out his pathos. He's just more violent and shitty about it in his interactions with other people, but often he's like working it out loud at people, and it's
Yeah.
uncomfortable, very uncomfortable. And then you've got Hearst, of course, who is the worst. Hearst is the worst. Um,
Maybe that's why he's named
yeah,
Hearst.
yeah. Oh my god. And I mean, Gerald McRaney is a wonderful actor and like fantastic. And I liked him from Simon and Simon. Jesus, that's showing you how old I am. Um, I loved that show as a kid for some reason. I couldn't tell you
I know what
what the
no, I
hell
agree. I
happened.
liked it too.
Yeah, I just remember being like, haha, Simon and Simon, right? And then he shows up in this, and you're like, I want you to fall off a cliff. Like I just whoopsie.
It's
Oops.
true. That's
Oh, he
it's very
slipped.
true. Oops, oops, he slipped.
Oops. Yeah, he's just and then you kind of see like how the different kinds of evil, I guess. Or it's kind of like
The levels.
almost I should do the grid, the D&D grid with those characters because it would be interesting. But yeah, sorry, other male characters.
No, that's fine. Yeah, and Brad Dourif, who plays Doc, I I'm gonna be guesting on shout out to my podcast brain twin Jen from my streaming bubble. We're gonna be covering one of my all-time favorite movies, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
Mm.
And so I wasn't I wasn't around with that. I didn't see the movie when it was originally in
I
theaters at
did.
all.
I have a funny story. I did,
You
and I'm
did?
the same age as you. I'm like what, like a month older than you? Oh boy,
No, we're both Sages and we're both in
yeah.
November.
So I'm like, oh really? Oh, okay. I'm like a couple of days older than you, maybe.
I'm
26,
November 29th. Yeah,
26.
so you're 3.
So speaking from wisdom and experience
Speaking from wisdom.
of having 3 days of crap in my pants more than you did on this planet, spinning around the sun. No, my mom told me that they wanted to see this movie so bad that they took me as a baby, like a 2-month-old baby,
Oh my
to go see
gosh.
One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, so I can say that I saw it in the theater, and then, of course, many years later as an adult, I saw it, but apparently I shit myself, which is what babies do, and my mom missed a whole bunch of the movie because yeah.
That's
So,
funny.
that's what you get for trying to take me. So, anyway, you had a different story.
Well, I was just gonna so I have a special place in my heart for Brad Dourif because of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and because of his performance and the character in that. And so I always love watching him and he's always good and he has a way of bringing he can be oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? He has a way of bringing this sensitivity to every character he plays, like this innocence is what I'm trying to
Mm,
like this childlike innocence even. It's so interesting to watch him because even he's a lot older in this, of course, than Cuckoo's Nest. And so watching him and watching his face and watching just the way he stands, the way he holds himself, he has a tendency to do that. So I'm always kind of drawn to his characters. I don't know if that makes sense,
mm,
but it's like this kind of, I mean, it doesn't even matter if he's playing a bad guy or a good guy. He always has a little bit of that innocence to him and that childlike wonder. It's really
mhm, mhm,
quite a skill that Brad has as an actor to bring that to characters, which makes you like the character, even if it's a character that you wouldn't normally like, or it makes you drawn to the character.
mm,
And I think, this show is filled with so many spectacular performances, and both male and female performances, and so many complex characters that, it's hard to really choose a favorite. You
mhm.
can like something about each one, I think, even if they're evil. You can still say a bad person is your favorite character. It doesn't mean you like what they do. It just means
Mhm.
you like the character. It's an
Mhm.
interesting character to watch, and I think that's the case for everybody.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, yeah.
Paul is an interesting character to watch. I mean, every single character in here has something about them that brings some kind
Mhm.
of interest to you. I
Oh,
mean, I'm talking
yeah.
about the majority of the main, like, heart of
Mhm.
the cast here. Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
fantastic. No, it every there is that's the thing about shows for me that really get me is when there's, like, not a weak link on that team, and Timothy Oliphant is great, but that character is somewhat limited, like, he doesn't even
It's true.
have he's kinda like he's very, very good at what he's doing, but he doesn't fundamentally have that much to do, and there's a lot of other it's weird because that's, like, the main character, but his dynamic with Al is probably the interactions you get between characters is probably also its own sort of dimension or unit of analysis to sort of focus on as I'm there pulling out my academic terms. I gave the same lecture, like, 4 times the other day, so it's if I just start going into that, we'll know why. Um, but yeah, it's so those little interactions though are great. Charlie Utter, he is fantastic. Like his relationship with Joni and some of the weird, like not weird, but unusual pairings that you get between people where they have a little bit of a friendship or a camaraderie with one another. Oh, I wanted to shout out for E.B. Farnham, who is slime. Like you can feel. You talked about smelling the show. You can feel the slime coming. Just that guy shows up. You can feel oily. Like you just feel dirty. He's the mayor, right, or the hotelier, and he's just gross.
Yeah, that's
And he's
sliminess.
played so well by Sanderson. I forget his first name.
Oh, yeah, William
Um,
Sanderson. Whew. Yeah, William Sanderson is he's
and
an
he's
interesting
been
actor.
in all kinds of stuff, right? Like, and I remember one of the things he was in was like a horrible racist truck driver or like some very B movie horror kind of stuff. Am I right about you know more about
Yeah,
that than I do?
he's done a lot of stuff like that. He does I mean, he, like, kind of shows up. I mean, I mean, of course, he was in True Blood,
Yes, he
and
was good in that as that character.
yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, he's been around forever. I'm trying to find the one that you're probably thinking of, because I'm looking him up. But yeah, he's like this. He's just you see him and you know who he is. He's like an amazing character actor. I mean, he really
Mhm.
is a character actor, and he does that slime thing that you're talking about.
Yeah.
He does that so
You're
well.
like
He really does.
it's like if you have the ectoplasm thing from Ghostbusters, you'd just be mopping it up when he's around. Like, that's how slimy this guy is, this character. But him and even, I
I'm
love,
just picturing like
like
something really gross, but
yeah, oh, yeah, no, it's this guy is if he's a he leaves, like, a snail trail, like, where he and I don't mean that sorry, that's not really I know that's used in a different context. See, that's why
no,
I
but
get called
I know what you're talking about
Tobias,
though. That
by my
little like
children.
the
Yeah,
little slime thing that runs and yes,
yeah.
I know what you're talking about because it's
But his
true.
even his interactions with Richardson, the weird guy that, like, starts to carry around the antlers, it just
Yes.
and this show is so we didn't talk about this
Excuse
yet,
me.
but it's so funny randomly. They'll just be, like, throwaway humor, like, something, something, something joke, and it's just, like, completely out of nowhere. So the writing is I know we could be here all day. But the writing of this show is phenomenal. It is like the reason you can put up with the swearing is it's like Shakespearean. And I don't know enough about Shakespeare to like have thought of this myself. I read this somewhere or I got this somewhere. But I want to say a shout out for the dialogue. The performances are fantastic, but the dialogue is written in such a way that you have got double, triple, quadruple entendres. It's like a very, very good rapper where they've got like 4 different references happening in their bars. I'm not that cool. This is my child telling me this and explaining it to me. Okay. So just but I can recognize it in this show. They'll be and rewatching it. I'm older now, so I have the closed captions on the
I do
bottom.
that too now.
And then also so I don't have the volume turned up to 11 when people are saying cocksucker every 3 seconds. Um, so yes, but anyway, that gives me another chance to, like, read the dialogue and catch some of those, double, triple, quadruple meanings that I wouldn't have got. So that's like Shakespeare, right? Where there's like layer, 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 layer. There's references to past things and other things that are happening, euphemisms. And then if I remember right, I read or heard somewhere that the dialogue has the meter of Shakespeare at times.
It does. It
Okay,
really does. I mean, it's very, speaking as someone who's theater,
there you
and
go.
it is, but yeah, it's very, very Shakespeare. This is very Shakespeare. That's the perfect way to describe it, because it does, and it does come off as Shakespearean in the dialogue and meters, and the way the dialogue plays off of other dialogue, and the meatiness of the dialogue is very much in the realm of Shakespeare. It's like taking Shakespeare and putting Shakespeare in the West,
Hmm.
and in a Western. It's very much like that. I could see this on a stage, honestly, and as theater too. So
Absolutely. Especially the first episode, the first few episodes where it's like it's very set piece looking. And the
mhm.
first pilot rewatching it, I'm like, ooh, this looks really 2000. Like, and then the lighting is funky. Something about the lighting bugged the shit out of me rewatching it. And then they get over that, thank God. And then they're like outside and there's natural light, but they'll do lighting. And Game of Thrones was good with this too, where they didn't have electricity, so you've got a lantern, and so they try to replicate that within reason,
Yeah.
when it matters. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, Shakespeare is the perfect way. And a lot of these actors, you can tell, are also stage actors too. And you can see that in some of the performances. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is I mean, we decided to do this and Justified, as also I decided to do them back to back as a way also to celebrate Timothy Oliphant, because I love Timo. I not just because he's absolutely gorgeous, but because he's such a complex actor. But I think this is a character that does, and this is nothing against the acting and it's nothing against
Mhm,
the writing, but it is a character that doesn't have as much to do as the
mhm,
others, and kind of gets overshadowed in a
mhm,
way. And so your attention isn't always drawn to him, even though he's the main character.
mhm,
It's more drawn to the other characters in it. And I think that's just kind of natural when you have a character like his, like Seth.
mhm,
It's just kind of natural that you might be drawn to the other ones,
mhm.
and that's nothing, because he's really good too.
He
It's not
is.
that
Mhm.
he's fantastic. I
Yeah.
mean, he even has a little bit of that sliminess to him
Yeah,
too.
he's a bastard. I mean,
He
that's
has
that's
these
what's
horrible
like
things.
he's I think what's good about that performance is they really have him rein it in. Like, I think when we talk Justified, this'll for me, his best performance is Justified, is as Raylan. He's fantastic. I mean, that character, that like I'm like, this is Raylan. This is not this guy. This is Raylan. This is how he would be. He's so different from Bullock. But I think they
Oh,
had
yeah.
him with Bullock. He's playing it really straight. And I don't mean that in a sexual or, I mean, he's like very, not really that likable. I mean, he's pretty, but I think this is intentional. I think you're supposed to initially root for him. You see where he's coming from, but he's also managing these really, really difficult, really problematic rage and anger issues that he's just kept shoving
Oh,
down. Like,
yeah.
so he is very toxically masculine in a lot of ways, despite being overall a pretty decent person. It's just he's kind of just always at that teeter-totter of when are we gonna when are we gonna explode?
Mhm.
When is this gonna like be too much? And you see that throughout the series. But I think as the audience rewatching and through this discussion, I'm thinking like, oh, we are supposed to kind of identify with him as like that's the normal guy. Like that's the guy, that's the character that we as modern people or as people with our set of values and socialization should probably think we would act like, except for when he flies off. Like, and so I think that's intentional that we are supposed to kind of make that connection with him. So that leaves him with not a lot of places to go, because you've got everybody else being so wild too. Yeah, and you can really see. I think Bullock's role is to kind of put you in the middle of look how fucked up this situation is. I think that's literally his kind of job as the series goes on.
Yeah, and then the straight guy is the perfect way. It's like you've got, I mean, like in comedies, you've got the straight guy, the straight character, the straight, not like Tanya said, not sexuality, but just the straight character there. And that is very much what he's, but yeah, the anger, that seething rage. And when it comes out, boy, does it come out. And it's very hard to watch at times. It's very, and you see it very early on. So it's always there. And I think Tim does that very well. He does that, where it's like there's something below the surface that doesn't always come out, and then you see it come out sometimes. And he plays a lot of characters like that throughout his
Mhm.
career. He's played a lot of characters that have something else going on. Even when he's played in comedies, even when he's done that, because he's very good at comedy too. So he has a tendency to find those characters, to have a tendency to find him,
Mhm.
and he digs into them. But it was interesting to watch this show and then watch Justified at the same time, because even though there's some similarities in the atmosphere of the shows, I mean, Justified is, not Justified is present day, but it's still got that Western feel because
Yeah,
it's Elmore Leonard
you can't
and all
smell
his.
Justified quite as much. Sometimes, maybe when Dewey Crow shows up, you can smell it. But anyway,
Yes, but it's not the same kind of smell. But
it's more
yeah,
of a swamp ass. Oh
yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
So that's kind of true. But
yeah.
watching, like, because I watched the series finale of Deadwood this morning, and then right after I watched the series finale of Justified. So I watched them back to back. So that was kind of interesting.
Way to read the cliff notes before your exam. That's funny. I like that because I didn't get to the finale, so I'm glad of Deadwood. I'm like episode 5 or 6 on season 3. I've seen it all a couple of times all the way through, and I think I have harder time watching season 3 because I hate George Hurst so much. So this is a testament to how good the acting is and how much you're supposed to. That I'm like, I don't even want to watch you. I just hope your back just hurts until you die. Like, that one song, play that funky music, white boy. He played that funky music, right?
Yeah.
Lay down the boogie and play the funky music till you die. I would love it if George Hurst would have played that funky music till he died. Till he died. Anyway, I don't know where that came from, but I've never heard of anyone dying from laying down the boogie, and that's a person I would have loved to attribute that cause of death to.
A special episode of Deadwood just for
Yeah.
that.
What happened? Oh, he
Laid down
laid
the
down the
boogie till he
fucking
died.
boogie till he fucking croaked. Jesus.
That's funny. Now I'm gonna have that song stuck in my head, but
You're
that's
welcome.
funny. Yeah, thank you.
I have
Thank
been
you.
stuck at home because people in my family had COVID, and all I have done is watch Deadwood and ride funk rides on Peloton. And if you didn't think those two were going to cross nerd streams in my head tonight, you were sadly mistaken. So,
That's funny. Um, well, I mean, we're kind of going on that line. We're kind of not, but I love this conversation. That's why sometimes when you have just two people, I'm not saying I don't love having big panels, but sometimes when you have just two people, it's like a lot more conversational sometimes. But I do want to talk about a little bit of the treatment, and we'll get also into capitalism and stuff, because I do think that is important. Thank you for bringing that
because Tanya
suggestion.
was like, you got to talk
Well,
about
no,
this.
it is important because capitalism is a disease. So anyway.
Well,
We'll
how do
get
you
to that.
really feel about that, Erin? No.
We'll get to that in a second here. But I do want to talk about the treatment of Native Americans, and we can also talk about all the other racism as well in this show. So
Ugh.
you think they handled all of
Oof.
that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof.
Oof.
No.
No, this is where I turn Midwestern, and all I can really say is, yeah, fuck. Like, it's bad. Like, not to that's not
It is.
that's not the intellectual content you came for. I know, but no, it's I think what is native there's first of all, there's not a lot of Native American presence in this show, despite the context being
Yeah.
this contention. Like, there's so whenever you're talking about story, right, there's internal conflicts, there's interpersonal conflicts, there's like larger group conflicts, and then there's world conflicts. Come to my 101 class. right? But that it's just sort of an abstract conflict that's existing a lot. Of course, that said, there incredibly racist sentiments expressed toward every group who's not white and every group who's not white men. However, at this time, one thing that I think is really interesting in this show that is that they display how whiteness as a category was constructed differently than we think of it now. Okay. And so what I mean by that is people that we would now consider to be white were not considered white in the same way and at this time and place. So the way that they react to Saul Starr, who's Jewish, and
Mhm.
they express some really problematic language, things about him. And then and that's I'm gonna come back to that in a minute. But then later they bring mine workers in who are Cornish and Welsh and like all these other kinds of Irish and different ethnicities from other parts of Europe, and they are definitely not treated as white quite in the same category. They are allowed access to bars and things that they would not be allowed if they were of a different race, but they are definitely considered second, third, fourth tier. Um,
Mhm.
yeah, so I do think that they do well with the show in terms of representing that those conflicts between groups. And also making you as the viewer, they don't glorify it. So it's not like, oh, the manifest destiny people like going out and blah blah. The natives weren't using this bullshit, right? Instead, they're like, this is fucked up. This group of people took this. It didn't belong to them.
Mhm.
Then they proceeded to be completely exploitative and horrific human beings about it. Like there's interactions between some freed African Americans that come in and then some of the white folks, and you're just like, I just have to like fast forward. You're just like, Jesus, this is just horrible. Like the way that that was. They show scapegoating. They show a character, a mob is trying to tar and feather someone, and then they're trying to lynch someone at some point, and it's like a couple times lynching. Actually, it starts off with lynching. Sorry, the show.
Oh,
I was
no.
just remembering that first episode. But yeah, it's really, I'm all over the place here. But yeah, that's the Native Americans, especially. They could have possibly been in it more. I think what is challenging is had they gone there with that, the show would have been more about native white interaction than about the characters of the show. And not that that would have been a bad thing, it just would have been a different show. Um, but yeah, it's, at every point they don't know, is the government going to defend them if the tribes come and like kick them off of this land, and all of the gold that they're you know pillaging is
Mhm.
from land that belongs to Native Americans, right? So I think it's never glorified what they're doing. It's, I think, an interesting commentary. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and when you said, with the whiteness in the show and how some people that nowadays still have all the benefits that whiteness brings us, there was a difference. Irish people have been treated differently. You look at that through history, and not just in the Old West kind of time period either. You had a lot of that going forward where you did have, you would have signs saying Irish people weren't allowed in certain stores, and you had that kind of. So looking at that, because I don't think a lot of people realize or remember that, or I mean, not like they would be alive, but I mean, remember that as from history or anything, and that's not taught, I don't think, as much. The different levels of class and racism and everything like that, how it worked also with white people as well. But yeah, the racism and the inherent racism is everywhere in the show, and it's everywhere and justified too. So
Oh yeah, no, that's a good point. And like I appreciate like
like,
what is so fascinating to me about that. I was talking with I finally succeeded in getting my daughter into Deadwood, the one who's 18, okay, just to once again.
once again,
Um
to clarify, this isn't
yeah,
like a 5-year-old that
right.
she's
The
saying
like
now.
older adult children But, she was commenting on how hard it is, like, she had just watched the episode where Bullock, has the fight, and
Yeah.
the
Oh.
thing that is so amazing about that to me actually is, like, Bullock is not randomly attacking that person, okay? So he has some reason for reacting the way he does. He goes way too far with it. His rage lid snaps off and he explodes. But this guy, the native, they even explain why he was doing what he was doing through
Mhm.
Charlie Utter telling Bullock, "Here's what happened." Like Al puts this bounty on Native American um scallops or something just horrible, and I
Yes.
don't even remember because he's trying to blame that
'Cause
that highway hijacking on
yes,
them
they're
or
blaming that on yes, but
mhm.
it's actually white people that are doing the thing that they're yes, which again speaks to what white people have done
Yeah, and
forever.
that's why I was saying, like, I think they're doing a good job of showing how fucked up and awful and evil white people have been.
Yes.
Like, that's what I meant earlier just to clarify my
Oh, yeah.
comment, but so Al puts this bounty, someone goes and just randomly, like, desecrates a Native American burial site so that they can get this bounty, and then, uh, another person sees that, a Native person sees Bullock, attacks him, and then it's a fight, the really gruesome fight to the death. But Charlie Utter is mad. Like when he comes across Bullock, he's like, I get why you did this. I get, but this is what the fuck is happening. Like, here's the context here.
Mhm.
He knows enough about that culture that he can understand why it was happening the way it was happening. And so I think the brilliance of some of these really difficult interactions show that it's not just a racist interaction, is showing how completely inept white people are and were at cross-cultural communication and valuing cross-cultural differences. And so that there, I finally got to my more cogent point, but yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
No, that's very true, and that's something that we still are. I mean, that white people still are. So that's why it's interesting when you watch this and then you're watching Justified at the same time, and it's the same I mean, it's different, of course, but there's still that same kind of thing. I mean, because Justified deals a lot with racism as well, so there's a lot of racism in that too. So, that problem still persists, and I think it is important. Like I said, once again, going back to what I said at the beginning, this show doesn't glamorize what went on, and it shows the dirty, the awful, the ugly side, and this is another side that's ugly and dirty and happened, and, even if there are historical inaccuracies, this stuff did happen. This isn't, made up that like that white people did this kind of stuff. So, yeah, I mean this country is stolen. We're all on stolen land. This country was founded through through racism, through murder, through on the backs of other people's labor that was free, quote unquote, that we stole, that kind of stuff. So on slavery, we built this country. So you can't ignore that because if you ignore that, it comes back and you never deal with it. We still have never really dealt with that. And so we haven't really dealt with this side either. And so,
Mhm.
yes, you don't have a lot of representation when it comes to Native Americans in the show, but I do think it's always sort of there under the
Mhm.
surface because you can't I mean, how could it not be?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like this existential threat. That's all, I
Yeah.
guess, is how I would describe it. Like the same with the threat of who are we going to get annexed by? Are we going to get annexed? Like, and then they do Custer is referenced,
Yeah.
and that's kind of interesting. And then at one point, the cavalry comes through, and it's something related to Custer, and they show how fucked up the people who have been in the cavalry. Like they show the post traumatic stress, like I think that's yeah, the show does not try to sanitize or present anything that wasn't vicious and horrific as less than vicious and horrific. And I think showing the Chinese laborers, that was
Yes.
fascinating because that is true as far as I know. And having had like Asian American history classes, that it was men who were brought over, not women. Women were not brought over. They were there were different laws about men who could immigrate versus women from China.
Mhm.
um, and the labor being, the railroad being the real driver of those folks coming over. And so that's just really fascinating, because then the other point I wanted to make about that is on a character level, you see people who sound racist, and they are racist. Everyone's racist, okay? In this show, I'm not glossing over that, but there's like there's like racism that is expressed, but then someone's actions are far less discriminatory in fact than what like, I'm thinking of Al and Wu particularly, like, um
There's like the surface racism,
yes, yeah,
and then there's the real. I'm
yeah,
not saying that's not real, but like then there's the real racism.
and you're
So I
like,
see.
"Yes, yeah, that's a weird way for like, but
I know,
that's
but it's
what I was trying to express, like, because with Al, you're like, "Oh, that sucks. Why is he talking to this guy like this?" But Al values and considers Wu his equal, roughly, like, in terms of positionality and power and
yeah.
importance. Not, he can't come out and be like, "I'm gonna treat you like an equal," because that would not fly in that context, and he's probably racist and wouldn't treat someone that way, but he definitely has more respect and collegiality for Wu than he does to Oliver and other, white people in the camp, so I think that's really, really fascinating. So and then you see Hearst, like, contrast this with Hearst, who brings, an African American woman who is his, like, personal chef, I guess. I
Mhm.
don't really know, and she's a really interesting character, Aunt Lou.
Yeah.
And at first you see him embrace her, and people are like, "Oh, he, physically touched a person of color. Oh my god." And then later so you think, "Oh, maybe this guy is like the one non-racist person in the world." Of course not. Because then later he's only has any value for her if she sticks in her place and if she does exactly what he wants her to do and
Mhm.
kisses his ass and stuff. So I think it's really interesting that they show that contrast between, like, sort of benign things that look like someone's not, maybe they're slightly enlightened. Oh, nope, nope, they're a fucking asshole. Like, they're terrible, which fits with his overall character, but yeah.
Well, it fits with the deep-seated racism being kind of inherent in everything, and you don't not being blatant about it, but it's always there. It's like under the surface of everything that's done is there's some sort of form of that in there somewhere. So it's like you can be blatantly racist with saying like, certain words or calling people certain slurs, but then there's also the racism that isn't like that, where it is that inherent, where it's in you, where you do something and you might not even in your brain, even though it is racist, you're not thinking that it's racist because, well, I didn't say it this, and I maybe treated them with respect in this instance, so I'm not, but the racism is still there. So it does a good job of showing that racism isn't always what you think it is. It's not always going to be someone just flat out saying horrible, awful stuff. It's also their actions, and it's also stuff that is deep seated in them, that there might be something they say that you may not think is overtly racist, but it actually is. So it's
Mhm,
that kind of thing. It's showing how inherent it and how it's woven into the fabric of life,
mhm.
you know.
Yeah,
And yeah. Yeah.
absolutely. No, I mean, they do a really interesting job with that, showing that complexity, right? Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the disease of capitalism. I do.
Yay. Yeah.
And speaking of railroads, we are right now, there is a tentative agreement with people who work in the railroad who are treated like absolute garbage, by the
Mhm.
way, but people who work for the railroad companies. And that to me is another symptom of capitalism, what's going on with that currently today, which they've reached a tentative agreement. So we shall see if that
Mhm.
holds or not. But there's labor disputes in this, and capitalism is already present. That's the interesting thing, is it's already present at this time period. We're not even in present day, but capitalism is everywhere. So
Yeah.
what did you want
Yeah.
to say?
No, thank you for connecting that to current events too. Yay. Yeah, and you might have to film me because I heard this on the radio and about the railroad strike, and the president had to get involved. And I think
Yes,
people, you sort of hear this in the background. You're like, "Oh, okay, railroads, but whatever, it doesn't affect me."
it
S-
does.
Oh my God, that was when if the president has to get involved in a labor dispute, that is massive, right? And they were talking about what the impact would have been had they gone on strike. Like, and they were, as far as I know, they kind of came to terms on wages coming, like they had reached an agreement there, but it was about work schedules and like
Yeah, because they have to
labor
work, like,
practices.
24/7. They are on call
Yeah.
24/7, and then they get, after a certain time, like, a certain number of days off, but they don't even get, like, we get, like, usually generally you get, like, 2 days off a week or something around that.
Mhm.
They don't
Mhm.
even get that,
Yep.
and they
Yeah.
have to schedule their time off so far in advance that they don't even get time off if, like, they had a family member die or something like that.
Right. So they're not exempt, or
It's
they're exempted, so to speak, from like what we would consider to be fair labor practices. And I think that's these labor issues, these issues of those tensions between capitalism and or infrastructural demands of a society and individual rights and like what we just need to be able to be human continue to shape and structure our daily experience. Had they gone on strike, we would not,
ooh.
we're already feeling inflation. We're already feeling not being able to get goods we need, like medications, et cetera. That just it would have been across the board a big old kick in the ass for everybody, like right up the cooch. And I haven't said those words yet, so I'm gonna, but capitalism, talking about other, as Jane says when she's trying to get in the bath, ouch, I burned my snatch. Talking about other, um, other other cooch kickers. Yeah, it's I think what when we are looking at the history, right, of this time period in the West in particular, I think so often we're not looking at the role of industry and capitalism and the role of this wealth and people accumulating this wealth and being hell bent on accumulating it had on both where we are now and what came after and what that was like for people at the time. And I know that they talk about like the robber barons of the railroad, et cetera. Or you hear that term maybe in your history somewhere, but you don't, it doesn't, I don't know. For me, it didn't like slam into my brain as the same way as showing this character. And then having been an adult and coming back to this after having read a considerable amount of Karl Marx, right? And like, you're like, oh my God. Like I knew there was racism. I knew there was white people taking stuff that didn't belong to them and being horrific and being exploitative, but I don't think I thought about it in a structural sense of a economic and political system that's intertwined so much that you can't get them apart. So they showed this with the camp, as Deadwood originally is, trying to like have any kind of political structure. They show this with Hearst trying to like make everything, the laws be the way that they should be for him, in order for him to really just get access to all this gold. And his greed is motivating him. And they do show his pathological greed, but they show how far someone with means and pathological greed can go. Like that's really the object lesson here, I think, is just like, wow, holy crap. And there was nothing to prevent these people from doing this. That's, I think, what else is shocking. Like there's times when Bullock and other characters want to resist this and they can't. So I think there's like different, I'm going all over the place, but there's different kinds of power. And the show is really about power and power struggles, right?
Mhm.
There's physical coercive power. Can I, if I'm elsewhere, Jen, can I beat the shit out of you? Can I grab my knife, or can I have Dan Doherty grab his knife and slit your throat and feed you to pigs? Which happens a lot, right? So there's that power. Then there's like coercive power, which is Al also manipulates moving behind the scenes. Like, hey, Bullock, you should be sheriff, because I understand you and I know your limits, and I know like I can kind of trust you to act a certain way. And then there's Hearst power, which is changing the fucking rules of the game to be you, to rigging the game, to making it all up. It's like playing Candyland with a 3-year-old where they just want to change the rules if you're winning.
It's true.
Or if you're like, but the 3-year-old has money and guns and can kill you, you know? Um, and all they care about is getting, you know, all the candy cane cards or whatever. So it just I went all over with my metaphors, but
No, but that's a
showing that
perfect
power.
metaphor.
Yeah,
Mhm.
showing that how that he can kind of control and rig that game to such an extent that it just, you know, prevents, it constrains other people. It hamstrings, like, even Al and even other characters from being able to, you know, accomplish anything or even navigate. So really, and eventually he does manipulate. Alma Garrett Ellsworth is sort of the lone holdout for a long time, and she opens a bank and she's like falls upon this wealth and ends up being a very dutiful citizen in some ways, like, okay, I'll open a bank, okay, I'll do this and I'll try to
Mhm.
better the community, and that's really fascinating to me. And then he ends up just being a complete evil bastard and getting her to sell out and leave, basically, because he just can't handle not having control. I mean, what the fuck is wrong with men? Anyway, okay, sorry.
No, it's you don't have to apol because
Or
it's true.
people, like, I'm just like, what a
Yeah.
crazy thing to think that, I'm sorry to be labeling or ableist, what a wild thing to think that you have a right to do that because you think the minerals in the earth talk to you. And then you just shape everything to fit your bullshit, self-aggrandizing, toxically masculine narrative, and that happens to line up with other people's interests in such a way that you get to be God, kind of
Mhm.
like, okay. That was my
No, but
little, like
that's the perfect way to describe capitalism, frankly. I think, no, really, I mean, I think capitalism is, people like to paint this pretty picture on it where it's like capitalism means anyone can make anything of their lives and anyone can be rich, and that's bullshit. It's just not true because like you just said and expressed, and the Candyland thing is a perfect analogy there. It really is because it's like it's just being like, "Okay, I want my big slice of the pie, and I don't want anybody else to have it if it's going to inhibit the amount of pie that I get. If I don't get this huge slice of pie because I have to give a little bit of my pie to you so that you can be sustained and you can eat, then no, I'm going to take that pie and it's going to be that's going to be my pie. You don't get a slice of it unless you work hard. Yet, even if you do work hard, I'm not going to give it to you if it's going to somehow infringe on my eating that pie that I love so much.
mhm,
If I already have that wealth, how am I going to share it with people? I mean, you have people now, and this is the same way it is now. You have people who could easily solve hunger, who could easily help. We could easily have everybody have a roof over their heads, but we don't want to do that because it's all about money and power and greed. And this was the formation of that. You saw that really
mhm,
forming in this when you're forming towns and you're forming this system. And of course, someone's going to be like, well, I want to be the one with all the power. Instead of us working together like an actual community, we're not going to work that way. And we're going to have people who are the hierarchies. And if I have more money and I have more of whatever is considered more of a better currency at that time, period, then that automatically means you're supposedly the better person and the person you're supposed to respect more. And that's where that disease is, in my opinion, because
mhm,
that's BS. Because then it makes I personally am dealing with a lot of this of like being at a certain point in my life and looking and you look at people who have certain things and you're like, I'm nowhere near that, or I don't have that in that way, or I don't have my life in this way. And that's all comes from that, where you
mhm,
have this whole system that is built around what you have and how much you can get, and that's how it makes you a person. That's where your value is in life, and you see that in this show. That's where your value is. If
mhm,
you have the stuff, if you have whatever has most value to it, that's not even real. It's not even real. That's the thing. It doesn't have a heartbeat. It doesn't have a soul. But whoever has more of that is automatically the better person. And it's so messed up because then all these other people get pushed down further and further and further. And so while you're saying they can, rise up, that's not really true.
mhm,
Because if you're in that position, not that it hasn't happened before, but if you're already in that position, you're born into that position, say, the chances of being able to get into that position that's supposed to be the respectable one where you have more money and you're able to, sustain a life that you want, and you don't have to, get handouts or whatever, then that somehow makes you a better person. But if you're born where you already are struggling,
Mhm.
and there are all the people that don't want you to take any of that from them, then you're going to have a hell of a time getting up there. I mean, the amount of people in this time period that had that wealth was so tiny, and the amount of people in present day that have that wealth is so tiny.
Mhm.
So it's just
Yeah.
it is just, I really do think it's a disease. It's an
Mhm.
illness. And what we are seeing now, and you saw it here too with people, when people would get sick, um, people be dying, and it's kind of parallel here, where you see that, where it's like shows all the cracks there in
Mhm.
that system that's supposed to be so much better than the other systems in the world.
Yeah,
So
it's fascinating, you're right, like, that's such a mind fuck in a way, like, that this whole show, the premise is
I
we're
know,
we're
right?
we're no, but we're like, it's awesome, like, we're going to this place to try to be free, like, to try to do the commerce we wanna do, and whatever that is, like, it's illegal, it's vice commerce, or you're just trying to start over, like, they're presenting that as kind of the starting point of this show,
Mhm.
of course, this is built on horrific treatment of Native Americans and war and pillaging, etc. Um, but then ultimately they get like ruined by someone who's better at it and has more money and can just completely
Yeah.
take all the pieces and swipe them off the game board and say, now we're playing this game and I'm up here and you're way the fuck down here and good luck. And, and I'm just thinking of even the way Hearst manipulated the press and had rumors float about, oh, you know what, if this place comes and takes these annexes us, they're going to invalidate all these claims, and had people sell like panic, like insider trading, basically, like
Yes.
panic and sell their claims before he even got to camp to be able, or town, to be able to like just consolidate. And he had agents doing this. And then they also show anytime someone he even gets a whiff of organizing or a union, they get
Mhm.
murdered. Oh, how convenient. They fell down a shaft, right? And nobody can do anything about it, um, because there's still not like legal standards and they can't prove anything. And they
Yeah.
can't like, yeah. So it's just this vacuum that they were doing okay as a community. Even that, my favorite episode so far, I think, might be the plague one, which is, as a
Oh,
germaphobe,
yeah.
probably a little shocking. But this is where the community, like, they have smallpox happen and they get together and they figure it out. And it's not, perhaps ideal because they're like collecting money to bribe this other government agency so that they can get better, a more advantageous system or whatever, right?
Yeah.
There's all this
Mhm.
politicking and posturing. But in the course of doing that, they managed to essentially collect voluntary taxes for the good of the community to be able to construct this tent, have the doc like focus on treating people, and then they send people to go get the vaccine. And guess what? In 1870s, these hoopleheads who are filthy, who you can smell, who just have who knows what happening, they line up to get their vaccines.
Yes.
Unlike current years, right? Like, you're like, I'm rewatching
Mhm.
the show now, and I'm like, "Are you kidding me? These people who couldn't read, like, would get anyway," and they probably did, but just come on, people, get your shots. Okay. Sorry.
No, it's it's very true. It's, because saying, like, that it's a form, what you're talking about, with people being willing to chip in and willing to do what's good for the better good for humanity, for other people. I mean, honestly, there's socialism a lot in that. And socialism is thought of as a bad, dirty word, and it's something you don't do. But there are some aspects of it that are so amazing and lend themselves more to humanity. And so when you have in here and you see people doing that, and especially when you're looking at it, when you're rewatching it from a present day lens, it's a little like, oh my God. That episode was a little bit was hard to watch, I have
Yeah.
to say,
Yeah, it
because
was.
you're looking at it from that lens and seeing how
Mhm.
selfish we are. We are so self-absorbed. It's like, and I'm using the big general we here, everybody, but we are. We're a very selfish society. We
Mhm.
like to preach that we're like some kind of, based in like Christian values or whatever. And, in all honesty, the the whatever your beliefs are, the person that Jesus was supposedly would be just aghast and would just be saddened by the stuff that is supposedly Christian. It's like, it's
Yeah.
so backwards. We are so backwards. And you see the beginnings of that in this show, of how
Mhm.
backwards that thinking is, of we're all in this together, but we're not really. We're all alone, and we're as every person for themselves.
Mhm.
And then when you do see people come together and it's great and wonderful, but you eventually it's going to be vilified, and eventually it's not going to be that way, because eventually whoever has all that money and that power structure, they will be able to be like, take that away, if that makes sense, or get rid of that. So I don't know, that made
Yeah,
sense.
and even I mean, I think not to split hairs, but like capitalism does not have to be evil, I don't think. Like I think you can have incentive for profit and small business and things like that, because they were
Yeah.
showing that actually in this show. Like they Swearingen, the unofficial leader of this, goes to the quote unquote like pillars of the community, which are people who have more money or means or have access to communication, like the newspaper guy. Love the newspaper guy, too, right? In order to kind of like rally the team, and then they end up doing something for the good of the community. But his position as an entrepreneur enabled that a little bit. So I think that just it's just a qualitatively different animal than Hearst and that level of capitalism with a big C or something. Yeah.
Yeah, no, yeah. No, that's a good point to point out, because I think it's because there's an idea behind it, and there are some good tenets to it, but it's the way that human beings have manipulated that and have taken advantage of that system in a way that makes it hard for others to be able to take advantage of the system too, or to reap the benefits, I should say,
Mhm.
of capitalism
Mhm.
and that system.
Or
So,
just survive. Mhm.
yeah, that's the other thing.
Or have
To
a
reap,
reasonable, work day where you're not Yeah.
yes, yes. I mean, it is kind of ridiculous.
Mhm.
So, yeah, where you're treated like you're a person, and you're allowed to have a life, and you know, to not worry every day whether or not you're going to eat, or if you're going to have a roof over your heads, that kind of thing, which
Mhm.
is definitely in this time period too. You have it to a different degree. It's a little bit different than now, of course, but you still can see the parallels. So
Mhm.
yeah, so we've already talked a lot about that. We've already talked about the glamorization and stuff like that. But I did want to talk about, for time here.
Yeah, fair
we'll get
enough.
we'll get to the finale here and talk
Okay.
about the finale. So I know you didn't watch it.
Not
You
recently,
didn't
but I
watch
have
it, but you have seen it.
I've seen it. I've seen the movie, which we didn't talk about. I think we're gonna have to have part 2. I think we're gonna have to do
A
a
follow up.
15 years in the future Deadwood podcast part 2. No, I'm just kidding.
If it's, hey, as I always say, if an episode ends up being really popular and there's a way to revisit
Yeah,
the topic, we will.
that'd be cool. Us and the 5 other people who love this show this much anyway. But yeah, okay. The finale. Yeah.
So your thoughts on so did you
Oh, my
like the way it read?
thoughts.
Yeah. Did
I
you like?
think so. I think, unfortunately, it definitely felt unfinished, I think,
Very
and
much so.
people yeah, there was a lot of because I don't know if they knew they were gonna have to be done. I don't think they did when they wrote it, I don't remember. They definitely could have had at least another season or 2 because this show never really it's concise seasons, it's like 12 episodes, So it's not, you're never like, oh, this is too much. We're just fucking around in this episode and nothing important is happening. Everything matters. And so it definitely felt like we left some things hanging. Um, and that said, I was reading an analysis just before the podcast that was saying one of the things about the show is that they never really wanted to like cleanly wrap anything up. They always wanted loose ends. And that
Mhm.
was part of the appeal, like either things coming back that had, which is also what makes Game of Thrones complex and amazing and interesting in some ways, is things will take 6 seasons to be revisited, or we're sowing seeds here, then it bear fruit here. And so I can see that being relevant. And you do see in a lot of ways the full um ripples and evil shit ripples, the shit ripples of Hearst,
Shit.
right? The shit ripples, like, not, we're just gonna go there.
The visuals in this episode are
Hey, I call it like I see. Anyway, just like with Trixie, being so distraught over, appropriately so, about Ellsworth and that murder. And yeah, he just straight up murders a dude because he wants the wife's stuff, because he can't. He's just, I wish he would lay down that boogie and die. But yeah.
on the special episode of Deadwood.
Or if he knocks a hole in the hotel, which should clue you into like what he's gonna do, and he leaves it a mess. And if he could have just got drunk and just like fell, just stumbled. Anyway, yeah, I know that's not the point of this
Lay down
show.
that hotel wall and
Yeah,
die.
yeah. Just, oh, maybe he knocked out a structural beam and he just gets crushed to death. Couldn't that happen in episode 13 of season 3? Yeah. Or, because part of you is surprised Bullock isn't just murdering this guy at this point, or trying to, which I think he would have if he could have got away with it,
Yeah.
basically. So yeah, so you see the full effects of that. Al ends up needing to choose to save Trixie by murdering someone who didn't deserve it. Not that anybody deserves murder, but and that's just really awful. And at the same time, you don't want Trixie to have to answer for her actions. Kind of like she tries to kill Hearst. To be fair, she just was a bad shot, unfortunately. Yeah. Damn it, Trixie. Anyway, yeah.
Tricks are for
Yeah.
kids. No, sorry.
Aim for
Sorry.
aim. It's like a Thanos, like aim for the head. Come on. Like,
Yes, yes. Always remember that. Aim for the
aim
head.
for the head. Yeah. So it just, unfortunately, that's kind of where they kind of end it. And so you're not sure quite how that dust is gonna, it kind of ends with like, oh shit. And then they just leave you there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, we've been talking about a lot of shows over the past couple of weeks that actually have really great, wonderful finales and leave it where it's not all wrapped up necessarily in a tidy, neat little bow, except for I think you could say 6 Feet Under is. But even though you have that, you still have that open where if you did revisit it, it would work. It would seem fine, and it's not everything's perfect, but it's good. But this one, it really leaves you sad that there wasn't more because there's so much more to say. And this one, you can tell they really were not expecting it, and people were very upset when the show got canceled. So, and I'm really surprised the show got canceled,
Hmm.
honestly, especially during that time. This was like the kind of stuff that people loved. So, I am
Hmm.
shocked by that there weren't like at least 5 seasons. To me, this show feels like a show that would have 5 seasons. I mean, the only plus side to it is that you didn't get to the point where it went downhill
Right.
or it got
Hmm.
monotonous. So there
Hmm.
is that side, but it is such a not I mean, I guess you could say cliffhanger, but not really, but it's just like it leaves so much up in the air that you don't get answers to that it's unsatisfying.
Hmm.
It feels just like a season finale, not a series finale.
Yeah.
And it is, I mean, it's that final shot though. That being said, that final shot though of just Al on the floor just cleaning up that blood is very powerful and is, I think, says everything about the show just in that shot,
Yeah.
honestly.
Yeah.
It's, like, down and
Yeah.
dirty and depressing and sad and gross and visceral again. I know I've
Mhm.
said that word a lot, but I think it applies most of the
Yeah.
show. That final shot, even though it's kinda disappointing as a series finale, which is not their fault, it's
Mhm.
disappointing because you wanted more,
Mhm.
but that final shot is a very powerful way to end it
Mhm.
because it's kind of like it's very quiet, but says a lot, so
Yeah, dealing with the consequences, which is a very
yeah,
big theme throughout, right? As we've said, the consequences of other people's behavior or the various, existential sort of conflicts or external conflicts happening that they just find themselves in the middle of and are trying to kind of live or survive or have their own little piece of something, the American dream kind of, right?
yeah, mhm,
So yeah, it is such an American show as we talk about it, that it's such a commentary for America, um, good and bad,
yes.
that it really, I think it's one of those shows you watch and you feel smarter, and I hope that's true. Like, you watch it and you're like, "Oh, oh, I feel like I learned something," or, "I thought about things." It gives you such a perspective, shift from what, maybe at least I grew up with this version that was very like, Thanksgiving was this harmonious sit down of native,
Yeah,
or cowboys were, if they had the white hat, they were a good guy, and John Wayne just strolls up and blah blah bullshit, stuff that I think
mhm,
even at the time we kind of knew was bullshit, or Lone Ranger and Tonto, you know, which was
yeah,
probably unfortunately one of my first like media exposures to sort of a Western theme. And to kind of see this and go, "Oh, this is what it was much more likely like." I mean, of
mhm,
course, this is its own version of extreme, but it does enough to combat that narrative that it's really interesting. Our government is also very fucked, and, I just like, not to we should all vote, we should all democracy, blah, blah, drink the Kool-Aid, educate yourself, yay, but our government has never not been corrupt, and I don't say this to, like, buy into bullshit conspiracy theories, it's more like, "Oh, wow, okay, the capitalist pipeline to the people in power has existed forever," like, in terms of,
mhm.
"I want you to vote how I want these people in power, I want them to do this thing," and, you know
Yeah, power corrupts.
Mhm,
So, and you really see that. So,
mhm.
yes, yes. Well, I think that's a great way to segue into, since you said you have a connection, into 6 Degrees of Finwit
I
Rock.
do, and I hope I'm right about this. I'm so proud of myself because I thought, as you know, for many
I know.
weeks that Finn
Just
Whitrock was the kid from Stranger Things, and he's not, and I was a
no.
little concerned,
I would be concerned too if
and
I were
I was like, "I don't think Aaron would be doing that," and so in
ew,
my head, I
gross,
was
no.
like, "I'm definitely not thinking of the right person," but, I believe he's on American Horror Story, right? Which I
Oh,
don't
yes.
watch,
Yes, he is. Mhm.
but Sarah Paulson is on that or in
Oh,
something
yes.
with him?
Yes,
She's in
she's like
Deadwood.
Ryan Murphy. Yes, there you go. See, quick, quick, quick.
Yay, see?
Yes.
I was like, "I'm so proud. I know that who this person is. I know they're in Ryan Murphy stuff, and I know I can do it in one. Boom."
Very good. Yes, American Horror Story is a very, very easy one to use to connect because there's so many people that have been. Yes, Sarah Paulson is Ryan Murphy's. He tortures her is the way I like to put it in his shows. She's a
Muse?
favorite. Yes, she's a muse, but she's also kind of Jessica Lange was really his muse for a long time,
Ah,
and
okay.
then Sarah Paulson. He loves to make her cry and loves to torture her in various different ways. And I love Sarah Paulson, but
She's really good in this too, like, I have to say
she's good in a lot of things.
she
Yeah,
has, I mean, she's fantastic as a performer, but, she's like this small character that doesn't it's really not that important, but it's an interesting it's another person with all these different layers going on in them and her behavior. Also, there's a little Kristen Bell cameo, episode or 2, which
yeah.
are tough to watch, but funny to see these people who are so young because it's 20 years ago or whatever that they did this.
I
Yeah.
know. It's always funny. That's what was happening when I was rewatching 6 Feet Under. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I forgot Chris Pine is in an episode, and this
Oh,
person."
okay.
Yeah, it's like that kinda thing, and you're like, "Oh, they're so
Yeah.
young, and nobody knew who in the world they were at
Yeah.
that time." So it is always interesting. I used Molly Parker. So Molly Parker was in The Wicker Man, the remake of The Wicker Man, with Nicolas Cage, who was in the great, wonderful movie that came out earlier this year with Pedro Pascal, The
Oh.
Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent, which, as I've said before, we need to have like a series of movies with Nicolas Cage and Pedro Pascal. They just need to do a bunch of movies together. I don't know if you've seen this movie,
Not
Tanya.
yet. It's on my list. I wanted
It's
to see it. Yeah.
one of the best movies of the year.
Mm. Oh,
Absolutely
nice.
hilarious, and Nicolas Cage is playing a version of himself in it.
Right, which is about right for him at this point. Yeah.
Yes, exactly, yes, yes, and, that was co-written by Finn's cousin. So
Oh,
there's
way to take the back door to the alley, to the tent, to the outhouse back there, and make me look like an asshole. Thanks so much.
That's not at all
What are you
what
trying to say? You trying to say, is that your clever way of saying I enjoy a fucking drink? Is that what you're fucking trying to say? Alright, anyway. I don't know shit about shit. Well, you don't tell me whether to stay or go or stay or stay or go or stay.
But yes, so so there's our 6 degrees of Finn. And speaking of Nicolas Cage, I'm just gonna give a shout out again to Jen from my streaming bubble, who's my podcast brain twin, who is also part of my Finn crew. And she plays 6 Degrees of Nicolas Cage on her podcast because I don't know anyone who loves Nicolas Cage as much as Jen. So
Maybe
definitely check.
Nicolas Cage? No. I just that seemed right. I
Or
don't know.
Pedro Pascal's character in The
Yeah.
Unbearable Weight of Massive Talent. Yes, yes, but go watch that movie, and go listen to Jen's podcast as well, and thank you so much, Tanya. This was a ton of fun, and I think it was a great, great conversation. Yes, put the hat back on. So
My hat.
and I know we had people pop in and out, so I didn't ask for comments because
Oh,
people were
shoot.
popping in and out, but no, it's my fault because I didn't ask because people would watch and then pop, and I was never sure, but I will be better the next time. Sorry. We haven't done as many live streams lately, so so I'm still trying to reorganize myself around doing the live streams. But Tanya, if you want to tell everybody where they can find you.
You can find me fucking in this position, holding up this building, and it's none of your cocksucking business if that's the no, sorry. That's the last of my Jane bits, I guess, for tonight. You can find me on I don't even know. I'm like, should I say this now? Because no, they know who I am. On Twitter at AK Nerdfighting, capital A, capital K, capital N, capital F. Yes.
You had to
That's
think
it.
about that for a second.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, and if you are going to be, you're going to be at, aren't you going to be doing a panel?
Yeah, yeah. I think so.
Yeah, because
I'm
Bex
going
talked
to
about it.
New York City. I really want to say it like Laszlo Cravensworth from What We Do in This. I love that show. I'm going to New York Comic Con. Woo! Finally, I've been trying to go to it for several years, and I just keep like, please, please let me come to your show. Please, may I talk at people for free? Please, I'll wear a costume. I will come out to New York. I don't know what accents were happening in that, but a lot of random ones.
A lot of different ones.
We started with Oliver Twist and we ended with some old bitch from Downton Abbey or something. I don't know.
Old bitch from Downton Abbey.
The main bitch, the Dowager Countess.
Main
Isn't that
bitch.
what she called?
I don't know. I don't watch Downton
I
Abbey.
don't either. I'm
It's totally not my
completely
thing. But yeah,
I'm just messing.
I like the main bitch.
Yeah. The one who always looks like she's going to a room trying to be a human fart detector. Did anyone fart in here? Pew. Okay.
So you're going to New York Comic Con.
Apparently, they're going to call me now and be like, yeah, never mind. Rescinded. Stay out there, you weirdo. New York Comic Con. And our panel is with Bex, who's often a guest with you. And it's actually her panel. I don't know why I gave myself credit. I am going to be a guest on her panel, which is about using fandom in higher ed. So fandom in the classroom and fan culture and fan products in the classroom, but instead of the focus on like middle school and high school, which is awesome because there's been a lot of that, it's a bunch of us nerdy college professor people. Yeah, and
Awesome.
that's sometime Thursday, forget like 1:30 in the back alley behind a tent. No, I mean, it's like I think it's a library where they do all
Knock
the
3
like
times.
yeah. It
Use the
sounds
code word.
and the password is Finn Whitrock. No, I'm just kidding. I don't
Well, go back and listen to our sex education episode. At the end of that, Bex does give more information about the exact day and time.
I know it's Thursday. I know it's 1:30, okay? I just don't remember where. I know it's a library. I know it's in New York City.
With Colonel
If you
Mustard.
can't find it from there, you are fucked and just stay home.
That's hilarious. But anyway, congratulations on that.
Thank you.
And other things. And we're gonna have well, Tanya's gonna be back for Justified, but we're gonna have Tanya back in November as well with an interview. So it'll be totally different. Everybody knows how my interviews go. I'm always very proud of my interviews. I toot my horn on them because I have gotten so many people tell me how much they love being interviewed by me. So
Oh, good.
hopefully, I've
Yeah.
had people tell me it's the best interview they've ever done.
Are you gonna make me cry? Like, are you like Barbara?
I don't think I've made anyone cry yet. So, but now I'm determined I'm gonna
Damn
make
it.
Tanya
Oh.
cry.
I don't know if it's gonna be different. I'll probably swear less if I can help it, I hope. I was a little wild tonight because, like I said, isolation will do that to you.
It's fine. It's fine. Like I
Yeah.
said, I've interviewed people and they have sworn up a storm. Well, not up a storm, but they have sworn as well. So yes.
Nice.
Yes. So look forward to that too. So everybody. So I'm excited to interview Tanya. It's be totally different kind of conversation. But go listen to my interviews. I'm pretty darn proud of my interviews, like I said before. So I actually care about the stuff people are there to talk about. I'll actually read the books. I'll actually watch the movies. Because I know some interviewers don't do that. I've heard that from people I've interviewed.
That's
And I
tough.
think
Yeah.
that they don't do their research. And
Yeah.
so that doesn't make to me, it's like it's not you're not making the person that's a guest feel comfortable, in my opinion. You're not going to have as good of an interaction when people have to do tons of interviews. And if they've done the hundreds, you want to kind of set yourself apart. That's just my opinion. Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway, so this is Erin. You can follow me on Twitter at eAprilBeauty. The E and the A and the B are capitalized. Be sure to like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/It's a Fandom Thing Pod. On Twitter at Fandom Thing Pod. No, it's in that one. On Instagram at It's a Fandom Thing Pod. On TikTok. Yes, I put a new TikTok up today. At It's a Fandom Thing Pod. And if you have any feedback, show notes, if you'd like to be a potential interview guest on the show, any of the cast members from this show, any of the creators, please feel free to reach out to us. Head on over to our website, it's a fandomthingpod.com. Click the contact us button, and that'll shoot us an email, and I will reach out to you. And also, while you're on the website, you can play the listener version of 6 Degrees of Finn Whitrock, where we want you to connect Finn to 4 shows or movies that we have actually done episodes on. So you can also listen to the episodes by clicking on the names there. So you head to the page on our website called 6 Degrees of Finn Whitrock. Really easy to remember there. And for this month, for September, but this will change every month, we are playing with Superstore, which Bex was on Superstore. We're playing with Superstore. We're playing with oh man, now I'm forgetting. We're playing with Scare Me. We're playing with Promising Young Woman, and then I'm forgetting the other BoJack Horseman. So those are the 4 that we are playing with. So just tell us how Finn is connected to those shows and movies in 6 degrees or less for a chance to win some merch. And then also while you're over there, sign up for our horror trivia event, which is starting in October. And I am going to close out with our little 17-second promo that I put together. So you can also see on Twitter, you can see on Instagram, you can see on TikTok. And we're going to be doing these various little things that don't really give you much information because it's a teaser and a taste. And Again, a shout out to Susie for letting us drench her in fake blood, which she said was on her bucket list. So only Susie. I love you, Susie. So we'll close out with that for the people that watch the live stream. But head on over to the second annual horror trivia event page there, get more information, sign up to become a contestant. They are a ton of fun. We'll do them on YouTube and Facebook. They're not podcast episodes. So you could win some prizes. You will automatically get a little goodie bag with some podcast stickers and stuff in it if you register and do the $5 suggested donation, which all of that money goes to a good cause. So, so sign up there for more information. So, thanks again, Tanya. And if you do end up watching this live, I guess we can do the other one live too if Tanya wants to.
We'll see. Yeah, I'm gonna need a mandated in my contract in my rider is a solid 10 minutes.
Oh, we'll definitely
a
have
wardrobe
a break.
change and putting food in my face.
Yeah,
but
and
yeah,
bathroom. Yes, we will definitely have a break, but we might be live, might not. But our next episode will be justified.
It'll be justified. Whatever happens, whatever hat comes on, whatever outfit I'm wearing, it's justified.
Yes. And that'll be our next podcast episode too. So until next time, remember, it's a fandom thing. Black Lives Matter and stop Asian hate. And here is the promo for all of our viewers. Good night. Go eat.